And he was just grumpy about everything. Let me click in that I've got the fact that we're recording in progress. Okay. So at any rate, he was grumpy about everything. And we were into it maybe 6 months or so. And one day we were out in the yard and I said, hey, what's going on? And he said, I don't want to leave you and I don't want to leave our home. And it was like, aha, that's what he was afraid of. He wasn't afraid of the things I was at all. And so I quickly responded, I think we can do this at home. But of course, I didn't know if we really could or not. Had I just made a promise that I couldn't follow up with. But at any rate, we entered it together and we did manage to stay at home till the end of life. And I can certainly tell you at the end, it was one day at a time to see if in fact we were going to be able to do that. And I certainly know that every course of dementia and Alzheimer's are different. So there's no way to generalize. But I do think that our story is a story that hadn't been written. It's more of a story that there's hope and it's about how you can do this. And so over time, his doctor had mentioned we were doing pretty well. And I had said I couldn't find a book to help me. And she had said I should write the book. So that was nothing that I had ever done before or ever expected to do. I'd come from an RN background and had taught parent education forever. So newborn care, breastfeeding, childbirth, but nothing about dementia and never had written anything. But what I did then is I started journaling a little more. I had already been journaling, but most of my journals were about my feelings and emotions. But once Dr. Jung said that to me, I thought, I should start writing down what's working. So if I ever write something, I can tell other people about what we did. And that might be helpful. So this is one of my 7 different journal booklets, nothing fancy, red, white, blue, all those colors. And then all these tabs are in it because when I eventually wrote the book, I really wanted a timeline for people. I so needed a time frame. What happens with speech? What about mobility? When does that happen? And so once I started working on the book, I went back to my journal notes and I dubbed little flags in there for his speech pattern. So what it looked like in year 2 and year 3, and when we got to 7 and 8, so that I could embed that into the book. So those journal notes turned out to be very helpful. At any rate, once after Mike died, it takes a while to recover, which took about 3 years before I even considered doing anything. And then if you read the book, you'll hear me refer to a little cabin in Montana, which was my father-in-law's and a favorite place for us to go, just outside Kalispell. So I decided to take my 7 books of journal notes and go write this book. And I headed over to Kalispell area. And I discovered it's really, really hard to write a book like this because I wanted the time frame, what happened when, I wanted it to be educational. And at the end of a week or so, I thought, I don't know if I can do this or not. So I headed back home, made a stop outside Coeur d'Alene at a rest stop. And I was out looking at a monument and a fellow was coming down in that direction. So I spoke to him about this monument. And then the conversation went to the fact that he lived there and used to live over in Kingston, which is about 30 minutes from where I live. I live on the peninsula on Bainbridge Island. And I said, oh, how'd you get here? And he said, I'm a book mentor. That was incredible. At a roadside stop, I met a book mentor. I didn't even know what a book mentor was, but it sounded like something I wanted. So I'm happy to say that Dan Zadra's name is on the cover of the book with me. He was wonderful. He really knew what he was doing. He had started the company Compendium, which is an inspirational book company. So Dan said, don't write anything. Think about what you want to write. And we started getting into communication via the phone. And he told me to start writing my stories. Just write your stories and figure out what you have to say that's different than other people have said. And then 3 years later, here we were with the book Mike and Me, which again, I've got tabs in it because there's different chapters I like to share with groups at different time. And I'm really proud of an award we won on the book. So there's actually a book out here now, and that's what I'm here to tell you about. And as always, I try and figure out what's going to be the most helpful and what can I say to you that you'd be most interested in. So I came up with a few goals for our short talk. We've got about 30 minutes, probably a little less than that now. But I want to talk to you a little bit about Alzheimer's, and hopefully you'll go away with a few less fears and maybe a little more hope. And then I want to give you some strategies that work for us. I'm not saying every strategy works for everybody, but having done this talk many, many times and talked to people who've used the book, I know that it's been very helpful to many. And then I want to end a little bit with the new hope about Alzheimer's, because there's a lot of new information out there that is like super exciting. So I want to spend a few minutes on that. So for chapters, um, I picked out the one which is called The Magic of Proper Sleep. And that was just an interesting thing to me because as we went through the illness, I discovered that Mike was sleeping more and more all the time. So it used to be he just liked a little afternoon nap. And then it turned out, even if we took a ride in the morning, he was falling asleep in the car, or he'd fall asleep right after breakfast out in the chair. And in the afternoon, he'd fall asleep. He was falling asleep all the time. And then the amazing thing was, because I was teaching parent education classes at Swedish Hospital in Seattle, one day I'd been over teaching a newborn care class, and I was talking to parents about babies' needs for sleep. And as we all know, if you're a parent, little tiny babies sleep a lot. They eat and sleep, eat and sleep. And eventually they get down to 2 naps a day, a morning nap and an afternoon nap. But if they don't get a nap, they get really irritable and really fussy. And I started thinking, maybe as Mike loses some of his cognitive abilities, maybe he needs more sleep. So I put that into practice. And certainly towards the end of life, we didn't only have an afternoon nap, but we had a morning nap. And how it worked was, in the morning, I had been using a system towards the end where he'd get medication in bed, have breakfast in bed, and then I'd get him up. But getting him up was really difficult because the medication hadn't kicked in yet. And then shortly after he got up, he was falling asleep. So I switched it around. Medication in bed, breakfast in bed, then you need a morning nap. And we made it a real morning nap. We closed the curtains, we turned on the music, I cracked the door, and he had his morning nap. And then getting him out of bed was so easy. And we kind of had a pretty pleasant morning. I mean, then we might take a ride or run a little errand. And then I learned the same thing in the afternoon. If he'd had lunch, I'm thinking, okay, time to go somewhere. No, he needed a nap. So it made a huge, huge difference to me by just adding that sleep. Let me just see if there's just a little section here that I can just sort of, I'm just going to read you just a little short paragraph because reading is so boring when you listen to one of these talks. But this is out of the Magic of Proper Sleep chapter. If Mike did not get enough sleep at night, or if we skipped his scheduled nap during the day, he became agitated and confused. Everyone knows that agitation and confusion are common symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, but I'm convinced that the simple lack of sleep may be a bigger contributor to those symptoms than people realize. So I wrote that chapter before people were talking as much about sleep as they are today. And today it is a hot topic. And recently I heard a talk from a gal, Nancy Isenberg. She's an MD and the medical director of the Center for Healthy Aging and Women's Brain Health. And this is what she said, all research-based information. Sleep deprivation increases plaque buildup in the brain. Restorative sleep allows our brain to clear toxins and waste. Sleep helps consolidate memories. Lack of sleep can affect dementia, causing delirium, psychosis, agitation, and other events, such as falls. So I wrote that chapter just simply saying, this is what worked for us. And now I feel like it's really supported with real strong research. So that chapter I wanted to share with you. And I've got just a couple of little insights from that chapter. Let me just read 3 insights. So when Dan and I did the book and had to figure out our format, we decided it would all be stories about Mike and I. And then I kept trying to plug the educational moments into the story, which didn't work very well. So we decided to put the educational components in the end and their insights. So anybody can read the book, but you don't have to read it from cover to cover. You can read any chapter you're interested in, or you can just go to the insights and look up, oh, this is what they did and this is what helped them. And then in the chapter, I've plugged in quotes from the journal notes, which is really fun because Mike's right there in the book with me. So needless to say, I'm pretty proud of the book. But let me read you 3 insights for this chapter. 1, if you take a nap during the day, you will discover you are a better caregiver late in the afternoon and night. So I learned that when Mike laid down in the afternoon, I laid down with him. I didn't have to lay down as long. I could usually slip out because he took a good solid nap. But it was important that I got my rest too. 2, studies indicate that sleep disturbances occur in about half to 3/4 of those with Alzheimer's. Once I started to think of Mike's increased need for sleep as a normal process, everything made more sense, and it certainly led to improving our dispositions. Then the 3rd one, many who have Alzheimer's fall asleep in front of the TV and or spend hours in front of it. We chose not to do that. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends no TV time for children under 2 and then only limited time after that. I think that's a good rule of thumb for Alzheimer's couples too. So that's my take on sleep. And then I actually have the recommendations from the doctor I just referred to. She says you need wind down time at night. And I will say that was interesting because we might watch TV until say 10 o'clock or so. But by the time I got Mike to settle in bed, that took some time. And then the other thing is we started saying prayers at bed. And we had never said prayers together, but I would kneel beside the bed and I'd say prayers out loud. And that turned out to be a very quiet, soothing time for both of us, and actually a very sweet time. And so we did have a nice slow down time after TV. She also mentions that you should have a cool, quiet room and a dark room. So we always close the curtains for naps. There was no more naps in the living room. It was in the bedroom, curtains closed, little lightweight blanket over my music turned on, and it worked really well. So we did not have sundowner syndrome where people wander around. You read about that. We did not use sleeping medications at night. So I can't say that's true for everybody. I can only say that research backs it up pretty well now. So, Christina, I said maybe questions in the middle. What do you think? We've only got, how much more time do we have left?
Christine, how much more time does she have?
About
Yeah, the first question is the symptoms of the first
Did you hear that?
question?
Did you hear the question?
I couldn't hear a question from anybody. Did somebody have a question?
Can you hear me if I stand here?
I can.
Okay, what was the question?
Beginning symptoms.
What are the beginning symptoms for Alzheimer's?
Oh, so one very common one is you think that people aren't hearing well. It usually takes, and it did for us, 2 to 3 years to figure out his diagnosis. So we ended up going in and getting his hearing tested. What they said to us is I needed to get closer to him and be clearer. They did not say he had a hearing problem, but nobody said maybe that's Alzheimer's. The other one was they thought maybe sleep apnea, and we checked out sleep apnea, and that did not turn out to be the problem. And then for me, what it was is it was actually kind of a lot of conflict for us. He was going to meet me somewhere and he wasn't there, and he would forget things. There's now good information about mild cognitive impairment. They actually know our brains start deteriorating, not being quite as sharp, even at age 30, believe it or not. And we know about 50% of everybody has some of that as they age, which isn't too concerning. And where they really start making a differential between the two is when your daily living is impacted. When you can't do your normal functions, that really lets them know that something is happening different. Much better with diagnosis today, much better. And one of the things they can do, of course, is a spinal tap to check to see if you have any amyloids. They can do blood tests as well that aren't quite as accurate. Did that answer it for you? Okay, I think there's some reassurance about mild cognitive impairment too. because I quite often think, gosh, what did I go in this room for? You know, that's not a problem. But even missing an appointment occasionally is not a problem. But if I can't function, if I can't add up the checkbook, if I can't, you know, buy groceries anymore, that's when you really know that you are having more difficulties. Okay, shall we move on? For the sake of time.
There's a follow-up question.
Sure, let's go for it.
Is it reversible if it's caught early?
Not reversible, but boy, let me tell you, there's some really, really exciting things that are happening. The new medication that out is called Leqembi. It's Leqembi, Leqembi, and it just got approved so that you can get it paid for by Medicare now. You do have to qualify. It's for people who are in early or mild stages. And what they have discovered is it can slow the process as much as 25%, which is pretty incredible. The other thing that is just really right on the horizon that they have discovered, and it came out of the University of Washington, they have discovered another protein that we didn't even know was there that we think may be affecting some of the amyloids in the brain. So the most exciting thing right now is the new medication. You have to get approval by your doctor. It's not an easy medication. They do it over 18 months, and every 2 weeks it's done by IV. So, and then they follow you very closely, but it is slowing the disease process. And then I'm going to end off with more things all of us can do to help keep our brain sharp. And another doctor from UW said that with those strategies, we can actually pick up an extra 10 years in general. In general, it helps our memory by doing certain things. Okay, good questions. All right, let me tell you about one more chapter, and then I'll move on with a little bit more on that new hope that I was just referring to. This next chapter I just want to mention to you is called The Best Medicine of All, and it has to do with laughter. So I think it's a really important chapter. Again, over time, I realized how important that was. And the first time I really became clear about it for Mike and I was he was out watching TV. And again, we were probably about in year 6. We were pretty well along the course. And he started laughing and laughing. And he said, you should come see this. And I went out, and it was a CD that they had on TV of Victor Borge. And Victor Borge is a zany piano virtuoso who plays the piano upside down and lays on the piano. And Mike was just laughing and laughing. And I thought, okay, we need to order that. So we did. And then there were other times where I just realized if we had laughter, the whole mood changed in our household. And it's hard to do that when you're dealing with Alzheimer's day in and day out, because I'm convinced the caregiver can also get depressed, not just the person with the disease. And a couple of people helped us with that. Early on, when I needed a little extra help, so Mike wasn't left alone, I had my daughter's friend come over. She was a young mother with young children. And when Stephanie came, everything just lit up. She'd take Mike for a ride, and they'd turn on a CD. He liked Anne Murray and the radio, and she'd give him a stick of gum, and they're out the door and they're laughing. And I'm standing in the driveway thinking, what am I doing wrong? But of course, when you're there 24/7, you're not as lighthearted. But Stephanie changed everything. And during the illness, my daughter had our first grandchild. And when Kathleen, my daughter, would come over with the granddaughter, Riley, even when Mike heard in the morning they were coming over, he wanted to get up right away. And then that whole day, having this little person in our house was just fun. And then a couple of friends from California, they were old time friends, when they heard things were getting tough, said, we want to come up and help. And Marilyn and Claudia were there. And I thought, okay, our routine's off. This is going to be really tough. And it never was. They talked about old stories, old things we did. The whole mood in the house changed. So I'm convinced that laughter makes a big difference. And this chapter that I wrote on the best medicine of all, in there, I actually talk about Norman Cousin's early study. He did some early studies about people who were very ill and introduced laughter, and it made such a difference to them. And then I was experiencing that myself. So now I want to just give you a couple of those little insights. I actually going to read you one other little short paragraph in this one, because I think this was sort of an aha for me. And I don't know I don't know that there's research on it, but I think it's interesting. As I write about the perk factor, and that's what I referred to all these friends and neighbors who helped us out, I can't help but wonder about the reason behind the depression that often comes with Alzheimer's. We know that when parents become depressed, their baby can also become depressed. Knowing the effect that a parent's emotional state can have on a baby naturally makes me wonder about the relationship between the caregiver and the Alzheimer's patient. Is it possible that if we as caregivers become depressed, then we may inadvertently play a role in making the one we love depressed? I don't know, but I'm inclined to think that that's really true. So it's just another reason for us as caregivers to make sure that we take care of ourselves. And I even hear, because I live on my own now, at night I may have watched the news or something that's not particularly upbeat, and I'll turn on, you'll laugh, because I turn on the Hallmark channel about 10 o'clock, and they have old not old I Love Lucy, Golden Girl shows on. And it's just funny, so I actually have a laugh most nights before I go to bed. And I think it makes a huge difference. So at any rate, I'd say if you're in that position, and if you happen to be the one who's diagnosed, if you can find some humor in your life and enjoy life in that manner, it's beneficial. Again, here's a couple of insights. The Alzheimer's Association reminds us that depression is very common amongst people with Alzheimer's, especially during the early and middle stages. Could it be that a little laughter therapy, especially with friends and family, might be an antidote? Number 2, some cancer treatment centers have introduced daily laughter sessions for their patients. After a laughter session, patients have said things like, "I didn't ever even think about cancer while I was laughing, and that felt great." Perhaps that'll work for Alzheimer's couples too. And last one, an article in the New York Times features a group called Nurses for Laughter at Oregon Health Science University. The nurses all wear buttons that say, "Warning, humor may be hazardous to your illness." I think that's good affirmation and reminder for Alzheimer's too. I was recently speaking at Rose Villa in Portland, which is a care facility for independent living and also long-term people with dementia. And I was there talking to them, and one of the people in the audience said to me that they have a laughter club. It's a laughter club. And I don't know much about it, but I just know when they see each other on campus, because there's independent living, it's a really lovely setup. They go by and they make some kind of little something to each other with each other's hands, and it just makes each other laugh. And I know when they have meetings, it's about sharing jokes and funny things. So I can't help but think that's pretty positive for them. Okay, I think I'd better keep moving here. So let me just do a little bit more about what we know about Alzheimer's, because that was your question that many people were looking at. So I briefly mentioned they're getting much better at early diagnosis, which is huge because they didn't used to be able to diagnose it as early. So now they're getting better at that. Blood tests aren't as good as a spinal tap, but the aim is to do early diagnosis. There's actually a professor here at University of Washington who recently got the 2024 award for her work. And what she's been doing is looking for a new protein substance, because we know we can actually have amyloids and peptides and tau in our brain, and there's a perfectly normal amount of that, but somehow they change. And when they change, that's when we run into difficulty. And they can actually relate it to as many as 14 to 20 different diseases where this substance in our brain is changing. So her research has been to try to find out what this substance is. She was awarded the award because she believes that she's now found it. It's gone through rat studies. She now has funding to start human studies this summer. So probably too late for us, but at least now they think it might even be a different substance than they recognized before. Pretty exciting. There's a lot more money going into research in the past. Alzheimer's has kind of bumped to the top of the line. We've come through a number of world wars. We came through HIV. We had polio. So funding went in a lot of different directions. But now Alzheimer's is right out there. So there's a lot of research going on. And especially the new drug I mentioned to you is very exciting. In the meantime, what we've got is we've got lifestyle choices. And those are well documented. We know there's some communities that they call blue zones where people do much better, and they have these particular lifestyle choices throughout the world. And they've been looking at that and studying it. They've had comparison groups where some people do certain things and other people do not. And it makes a huge difference if people do certain things. So here you go. This is what we know about those things. I've got my little notes pretty well messed up now. This is the one that I want. We do know there are certain things we can't change. We can't change aging process, and we can't change our genetic connection. So those two things we can't change. We do know certain things that put us at risk: diabetes, smoking, elevated blood pressure, elevated cholesterol, obesity, depression, alcohol, and head injuries. So we've got a lot of control over those things, and all of those things put us at greater risk. What we can do to decrease our risk are cognitive, and that's what you hear people talking a lot about. That's puzzles. They now list sleep, which is pretty exciting to me because they didn't used to list sleep. Education, greater education is helpful. It helps our brains if we've had a greater education. Social, all of you are here today, get an A in social. You made the effort to come to a social activity or get to the library for a social activity. We know that socialization and interacting with others is huge. Probably the number one on here is exercise. And we know that exercise, when you exercise, our brain likes it. It stimulates our brain. It increases oxygen to our brain. We even know that stretching makes a difference. So I've got a leg that's been bothering me this last week. And so I normally enjoy a walk about 3 times a week, and that's out. So what I've been doing is simply doing stretching, just sitting in the chair or standing up and doing some stretching in the morning. And it makes me mentally feel better. And it does bring up my pulse a little bit. So even minimal stretching makes a difference. Something new I just heard about at a recent, actually, it was a conference in Reno that I was able to be the guest speaker. And then another speaker was there. And she talked about the importance of our GI tract. And our GI tract is about 70% of our immune system. So she talked about the importance of regular bowel movements. Not everybody's every day, but if you don't go after 3 days, you should certainly do something and have a diet that increases regular bowel movements for your immune system to be functioning well. We know that a Mediterranean diet makes a difference. Nuts, fruits, vegetables, that's helpful. A couple more: hearing aids and glasses. If you're not hearing well, your brain's not getting the stimulation it needs. Same thing goes for glasses. So New York Times says 62% of Alzheimer's is preventable. UW says 40% is preventable. So pretty exciting. And then Dr. Grabowski, who's the head of the Memory and Brain Institute at UW, he claims that we can make a difference of 10 years if we, in fact, use all those different things. So that's pretty well where I wanted to go, except to do a little closure, which if we have any more time, I love questions, happy to do that. And I just want to say that my book is now available in the library. They've got 3 copies, I think, so you can take it out through the library. You can also purchase from Amazon. And I'll end with one last story. I didn't get to do any of the section on couples and can you be a spouse and a caregiver too, which is filled with tips about keeping your relationship strong, which is really a great chapter because I happen to be getting certified by John Gottman, a well-known couple relationship researcher, at the same time that Mike was diagnosed. So the neat part about that is I would teach couples who had new babies what they could do to keep their relationship strong. And then I'd come home and I'd say, Mike, you really should wear an I-band, a name band, and he'd go, no. And I had to back off and think, okay, I know how to do this different. So that one little chapter is about, can you be a spouse and a caregiver too? That's a really sweet chapter because it just gives strategies to keep your relationship strong. And even if it's not a husband and wife team, I think it works with mothers, daughters, friendships, just what you can do to keep that relationship in place. And then my last little story is a dear friend of mine who I taught with at Swedish for years, Marilyn, and her husband, Hugh. He ended up with Lou Gehrig's disease. And they well, she lives there by herself now, but in a senior housing area is where Marilyn lives. And about 3 years ago, I went to Lacey, which is where the senior housing area is, to give a talk. And Hugh and Marilyn had me have a bite to eat before we went over to give the talk. And Marilyn went out in the other room, and my book was on their counter. And there were pages that were turned over and marked because they had been using it as a guide, which is how it's designed to be. At any rate, Hugh came out in his wheelchair. Again, like I said, Lou Gehrig's disease, and pretty far into the disease. And all he said to me is, Marilyn's nicer to me now. And I thought, aha, if my book helps people to be nicer to those who are dealing with this difficult disease, it's been a success. So I'm going to end with that. If we've got time, I'll give you some of those couple tips, but we'll see how we're doing here. Christine, I'm going to turn it over to you because I think I used my time.
Okay, I think we're out of time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a privilege to be here. It really is. It's just kind of, you have that real big hope and dream that someday you can do this. And lo and behold, the book's out there, and I know it's making a difference. So thanks a lot. Have a good day.
Thank you.
That was good. Yeah, very good. That was really good.